Everyone who grew up reading Dr. Seuss books know that he was a brilliant writer. He makes children laugh with his goofy characters and funny drawings, while telling them a story using clever rhymes and invented words. However, there is more to his books. While not seeming it, he was a very political person, and several of his books embody political messages and ideas reacting to the post-World War II era, making his work very meaningful. While many of them have been overlooked since they are simplified metaphors, with background, you can delve deeper into their meanings. Dr. Seuss's first book to speak about issues was Thidwick the Big-Hearted Moose. Written in 1948, the story is about a generous moose named Thidwick. After inviting a small bug to live on his horns, many other creatures arrive. Soon enough, his horns have a variety of creatures living on them. Reluctant to be a bad host to remove them, Thidwick tries to compromise. When the creatures outvote him, saying they live on his horns now, Thidwick must abandon his horns. During the time leading up to World War II, many different European countries' ideologies were based on expansionism. Adolf Hitler, controlling Germany, wanted to take over the world, which was a major cause of the war. Before Europe stopped him, he had expanded Germany into several other countries. Japan also did this, since it's a small trade-dependent country, and thus attempted to take Russia during World War II to gain more power. Imperialism was a major issue during the war, and this book shows its negative effects. In this story, you have a King Derwin who becomes eventually grumpy and bored. To satisfy his boredom, he ends up wanting to change what falls from the sky. He and his scientists invent the oobleck slime. Eventually, the oobleck starts scooping up everything, and when people ask for the king to stop and apologize, he won't. When he finally does, the oobleck stops and vanishes. This book discusses egotism that dictators have and their absurd desires, as well as how horrible World War II airstrikes were. Written in 1957, this book skyrocketed Dr. Seuss's career, with 10.5 million copies sold as of today. When people think of Dr. Seuss, they often think of The Cat in the Hat. This book has to do with dictators. The story is about a cat entering the house of two children when their mother is gone, and does tricks to entertain them. The cat constantly calls for attention, saying, look at me, and performing. When he makes a mess with his tricks, he tries to clean it up and instead makes matters worse. Realizing that he cannot accomplish the task, he brings in Thing 1 and Thing 2, which represent the working class, and they can't solve it either. After seeing how much he needs the general people, he changes his ways, cleaning up his mess, and leaves. The book also reflects suburbia and life within a suburban home. The Sneetches is a story about anti-Semitism. On a beach far away lay two kinds of Sneetches, ones with stars on their bellies and ones without. The ones with stars always discriminated against the ones without them, saying that they were always better. This is passed on to the children, who become discriminatory as well. Things were rough for the starless Sneetches, until a monkey named Mr. McBean arrived. He offers the one without stars to go through a star machine that will give them stars as well if they pay him money. Then the ones with stars have theirs removed, fearing that if they keep them they'll look the same as the one with stars, and therefore cannot be superior. The Sneetches keep switching back and forth until they have no idea which Sneetch is which. Eventually, they all accept that they're equal. The theme of stars was a major issue during Germany during World War I. Stars were given to all Jews as a way of marking them, and they were treated unfairly, being banned from stores and public spaces. Then later they were sent to ghettos and later concentration camps. The story of Sneetches reversed this idea. People with stars were considered superior. There are clear themes of racism and discrimination within the story. This is one of Dr. Seuss's more famous stories. The story of Horton is about an elephant who hears a world full of people under dust speck called Who's. A kangaroo hears him talking to it and ridicules him, denying the existence of Who's. The kangaroo spreads the story around, and the eagle takes the clover with the dust speck on it and hides it. When Horton finds it, the kangaroo and the wickershams imprison Horton and prepares to cook the clover. The Who's cry out, and when every citizen shouts together, the sound reaches the kangaroo. She realizes that Horton wasn't lying and vows to protect the Who's. The story has many political messages within it. It focuses on the powerless and how they're voiceless in society. During the post-World War II era, minorities had a horrible time as many of their jobs were taken from them by returning white veterans. Then the Civil Rights Movement began in 1955, 3 years before this was written. There's also the issue of conformity in suburbia. Conforming was important, and those who didn't were pushed out of society. The kangaroos thought Horton's shouting and crying for something they didn't believe in was threatening the community and the peace. When Horton asks other people to help him, they didn't, because they didn't want to suffer the same way Horton did. After World War II, conformity was a cultural and political requisite. Horton is caught between two democratic communities. There are the conformists of the jungle and the civic-minded community of Whoville. Whoville is also designed to be a democracy during World War II. Everyone turns their differences away and are united against a common threat, the destruction of the world. There are many joint messages within the story. The Lorax is another of Seuss's most famous works. It's a story about a man named the Onceler cutting down all the truffle trees to produce an industry of needs. He starts by using an axe to cut down trees, but then creates more and more efficient ways using inventions. When he ignores the Lorax who speaks for the trees and tells them to stop, soon the air and water become polluted, and every tree is cut down. Unable to live there, all the animals leave, and the Onceler is very regretful about how he turned the world from a bright and beautiful place to a dark and gloomy one. It was written in 1971, when the environmental movement began picking up speed. A year earlier, major environmental policies were passed, including the NEPA and the EIS. The EPA was founded, and the first National Earth Day occurred. This was also a reaction to the expanding suburbs, causing deforestation and damaging effects to the wildlife in and surrounding the area. Dr. Seuss later described his work as pure propaganda through and through. One of his clearest messages is at the end when the Onceler says, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better." It's not. The original story of Martin K. Mooney, Will You Please Go Now, did not have any political messages. It was a story about kids being told to go to bed in different ways. However, in July of 1974, Dr. Seuss switched Martin K. Mooney with Richard M. Nixon. So it sounded like, "Richard M. Nixon, will you please go now? You can go on skates, you can go on skis, you can go in a hat, but please go, please." A newspaper by Bulchbord printed the new version in a column published on July 30, 1974 in the Washington Post. Nixon resigned 10 days later on August 9th due to the Watergate scandal. In the Butter Battle book, written in 1984, there are two communities. The Ukes, who wear blue and like butter on the top of their bread, and the Zooks, who wear red and like butter on the bottom. When a Zook slingshots a Uke, the Uke creates a better slingshot, and is later outmatched by the Zook with an even better one. The Zooks and the Ukes each create greater and greater weapons until they have weapons of mass destruction and end up with mutually assured destruction. This book is about the Cold War. You have two sides who start to cross small lines and begin to have an arms race. Furthermore, the Ukes wearing blue are depictions of the United States, while the Zooks are red, the color of communism in the Soviet Union. All the weapons in the story are used to scare the enemy and not actually trying to hurt or kill. It has a strong statement saying that people go to war over pointless things, such as how someone puts butter on the top of their bread and others have the butter on the bottom. It is extremely connected to the time period, as the Cold War was going on when the book was written. With his simplified metaphors, Dr. Seuss is able to convey and educate messages to both children and adults alike. He discusses sensitive issues during post-World War II, including imperialism, racism and discrimination, conformity in suburbia, environmental damage to the expanding suburbs, the dictatorship of Hitler and Stalin, and clashing ideologies between the United States and Russia. He used this media to spread awareness and to reflect the issues of the time.